There is also such an opinion among the imams of the sects. They say, wait a minute, isn't it clear what could have been bought with that money on the date that the loan was given? Isn't the purchasing power of that money clear? Therefore, this debt can be paid with another currency that allows the same things to be bought. Now, for example, this is one of the things that the fiqh scholars base their fatwas on, stating that an increase as high as inflation in the near future would not fall within the scope of interest which the Quran prohibits in Islam.
Hello everyone from Istanbul School. Dear viewers, this week we will talk about Islamic economics, Islamic finance. Our guest is Prof. Dr. İbrahim Turhan. Welcome, teacher.
Welcome, Ms. Fatma.
How are you?
Thank you very much. I hope you are well too.
Thank you very much. Professor, we use these concepts a lot. We use them frequently, Islamic economics, Islamic finance. But are they concepts that emerged with Islam? Are they concepts that emerged later? How did they emerge? Why do we use them so much?
Now, the concepts of Islamic economy, Islamic banking, Islamic finance are, of course, a part of our daily lives, as you said. And the general opinion is that these concepts have existed in the minds of Muslims since the beginning of history. That is, since the time of the Prophet Muhammad, the age of bliss, the Rashidun Caliphs. However, these concepts, namely Islamic economy, Islamic finance, or Islamic banking, are actually quite new and modern concepts, and they are concepts produced to meet a certain need. In order to understand, we need to briefly recall the development of this Islamist thought. As you know, the great empires where Muslims lived and were ruled by Muslims were the greatest superpowers in the world during the Middle Ages. In other words, in the Kintis subcontinent, in this Central Asian region, in the Middle East, including Turkey, and even in Eastern Europe and North Africa, empires where Muslims were the majority and ruled by Muslim rulers were dominant. Then, from the 17th and 18th centuries, there began to be changes in this image gradually. But the most striking change occurred in the 19th century. In the 19th century, these empires ruled by these great Muslims began to experience very serious political, first military, then political, economic, and increasingly cultural difficulties. For example, if we recall our own history a little, think about it. The 19th century was really very difficult for the Ottoman Empire, and as a result of these military defeats and other difficulties that followed, the administrators who ruled the state, whether it was the Sultan and the palace, the bureaucracy, or the ulema, in other words, all the decision makers in society, gained the feeling that something was wrong. How can we reverse this? How can we solve this problem? Of course, just like in the Ottoman Empire, Indian Muslims also discussed this. Muslims in North Africa also discussed this. One of the things produced in response to the discussions was that there are actually some problems in our understanding and perception of Islam. We do not live our religion correctly and as it should be. That is why these problems arose. So let's review our understanding and living of this religion. The entire collection called Islamism emerged from here in this way. Of course, the Ottoman Empire was a bit more prominent in this because it was a pioneer among Muslim communities and because it formed a border with the West. I don't want to go into too much detail and bore the audience, but it is important to keep this in mind. Let's skip a little bit in this context and move forward. Let's come to the discussions on the birth of the Pakistani state. In other words, this is actually the beginning of the 20th century. Now, because the Ottoman Empire was disintegrated, Turkey was born within the Ottoman Empire. This discussion was not made much during the birth of Turkey, because Turkey made a choice between the political movements summarized as Ottomanism, Islamism, and nationalism in the last period of the Ottoman Empire and drew a path for itself. However, this discussion continued in both Egypt and Pakistan, or rather India at that time. Here, especially among Muslims in the Indian subcontinent, two different models came to the fore as a solution. The first group said that historically, the entire Indian subcontinent belongs to us. Therefore, of course, there is a struggle against the British colonialism on the one hand. After we get rid of the British colonialism, we need to remain as a single state. In other words, the idea was that the Indian state should actually be a state in which Muslims were among its founding elements. Mahatma Gandhi, the leader of the Indian independence struggle, also looked favorably upon this idea. Along with him, the name of Maulana Abul Kalam Azad may be remembered by our viewers who read books on Islamism. Maulana Abul Kalam Azad was also a defender of this idea. On the other hand, there was Maududi, whose name was also heard a lot in Turkey later, and those with him, and Muhammad Ali Jinnah. They argued that no, there should be a separate state called Pakistan. In other words, they defended the view that Muslims cannot live together with Hindus. We should have a separate state. Now, a similar discussion supporting this view was going on in Egypt. Of course, there was no such separate state there. But the discussions were within the framework of what kind of administration an independent Egypt should have after being freed from British colonial rule. This discussion brought the following with it: Fatma Hanim. She showed the necessity of a separate independent state for Muslims as a complementary element. Islam is such a thing that it cannot coexist with anything else, be synthesized or harmonized. Therefore, if we are Muslims, just as the Islamic faith is definitely and categorically separate from other faiths, the economy of Muslims should also be separate. The politics of Muslims should also be separate. Since there is no such thing as Islam plus anything, Islam minus anything, the idea that Islam should have a unique structure, this happened especially in the 20th century with Islamism and spread rapidly. Now, this is an element of the discussion. For example, if I said the Islamic world, the concept of the Islamic world would seem extremely natural to you, wouldn't it? In other words, it is clear what we mean by the Islamic world. We think and assume that this has been around for a long time. However, there is no such thing. In fact, even the more traditional concept of Ummah, if you look at it, has emerged as a modern concept in the sense it has assumed in political discussions today. In other words, today we cannot talk about a homogeneous Islamic world, can we? In other words, there is no such concept as a monolithic Islamic world in history. Or there are other groups other than Muslims within the elements that constitute the concept we call the Islamic world. For example, non-Muslims living in the same society with Muslims also become a part of the concept we call the Islamic world or Islamic civilization over time. But as I said, since it came to the agenda as a discussion of the struggle for independence or establishing a separate state, the argument that there should be such an Islamic economy, Islamic finance, really became widespread and popular.
So what do we understand from this? What should this mean for us Muslims? What exactly distinguishes Islamic economics from other economics?
This is the crux of the discussion. You asked a very important question, Fatma Hanim, because when you look at it this way, since it is a concept that emerged as a result of a need, we are therefore trying to differentiate it from other economics or financial transactions by its nature. Now, another movement that has been effective throughout Islamic history comes into play there, Salafism. For example, in Islamic thought, in the Hanafi sect, which is widespread in geographies including Turkey, let's call it usul, fiqh usul in the method used by this sect. In addition to historical texts, namely the Quran and the Sunnah, which consists of the hadiths, words and actions of the Prophet Muhammad, the interpretation of these provisions and the use of reason in their interpretation also have an important place. In other words, in Hanafi jurisprudence, for example, when making qiyas, it does not have to be a straight qiyas, simple qiyas. Within the method called istizan, of course, it refers to these historical texts, the Quran, the Sunnah of our Prophet or the Hadiths, But beyond them, the facts themselves are also important. It is assumed that information can be obtained from those facts themselves. If you allow me, I will do a little here, but I will take the subject outside of this economics, finance thing. For example, this is one of the things that motivated me in writing this book, in the formation of this book. During my university years, when I was trying to better grasp and understand Islamic thought, I said that it starts with belief. Therefore, I have to read the text that explains the foundations of belief. As you know, the discipline that deals with the foundations of Islamic belief is called belief. The first book of belief written is the Book of Belief, written by Omar Nasafi. Omar Nasafi is one of the important scholars within the Maturidi school. He is in the Hanafi Maturidi line. Now, I bought the Aqaid book by Omar Nasafi with great excitement. It was so influential that after that, many things were written on it, such as the Taftazani Aqaid, which is also known as one of the important Aqaid books. For example, Nasafi actually wrote this as a commentary on Aqaid. It is called Sirhul Aqaid. Aqaid is the foundations of the Islamic faith. What do you expect, Fatma Hanim, right? Now, as a university student and a young person, I say, it will tell about Allah. It will tell about the afterlife, right? These are the people of Islam.
Yes, that is what is expected.
The first article of Hakai Tamim, Hakaikul Esu Sabitetun. The reality of beings is certain. Then it continues. The knowledge about those beings is realized and revealed in the beings themselves.
In other words, it develops like a book on the philosophy of knowledge.
It continues. The third sentence of the ruling is about the sources of knowledge. There are 3 sources. Now, what 3 sources? First comes the mind, emotions. In other words, the senses, the information we obtain through the sense organs. Third comes the faithful news. In other words, what we call revelation. Now, I was surprised. Then when you put this together with other information, for example, Ibn al-Haytham is an important scholar in the Islamic world. He is also a physicist, as far as is known, and historians of science in the world also accept this. He is the first person to systematically demonstrate that knowledge based on experiment and observation is legitimate knowledge. In other words, that science should be done with empirical knowledge based on experiment and observation. Now, of course, this is not something that will be found strange by Muslims. Because when you look at the Quran itself, for example, what does the Quran say? I am sorry, Kwak muhakak, muhakak, muhakak, muhakak, muhakak. The beings themselves are named as verses in the Holy Quran. Therefore, it is a very natural thing for Muslims to look at the beings themselves and gain knowledge from those beings and facts. However, this was not a normal thing for people throughout the Middle Ages and before, and even in many parts of the world. I also conveyed it in the book. For example, there's a story that Francis Bacon, who formed the foundations of the Enlightenment thought, told. I don't know if it is real or fictional. He says that one of the most debated issues in the Christian world in the Middle Ages was how many teeth were in a horse's mouth. The number of teeth in a horse's mouth. It turned into a theological debate, and the leading names of the church locked themselves in a monastery to resolve this issue. They look at religious texts as sources. At the same time, they look at Aristotle's texts because Aristotle's writings were also accepted as one of the basic sources of Christian knowledge, starting from Thomas Aquinas, a great Christian theologian. Because at that time, Aristotle's texts draw the framework of the world and existence perception suitable for Christianity. Then Francis Bacon says this debate goes on and doesn't get anywhere. One of the young monks who is assigned to serve there says, Masters, why are you making yourselves so miserable? Let's find a horse and open its mouth and count how many teeth it has. They get so angry that this is considered blasphemy. Why? Because you cannot accept information that you have obtained based on your own experience and observation as legitimate information. That theology, the basis of scholastic thought, rejects this. Since there is no such thing in the Islamic world, it is extremely legitimate to obtain information from the facts themselves in Hanafi and Maturidiyya. However, Salafism, we started talking from there. cares more about making references to historical texts. In other words, it does not find the methods found in Hanafi jurisprudence or the Maturidi Creed very appropriate. When Salafism came into play here, Fatma Hanim, a behavior such as going directly to historical texts to establish this economy emerged, saying, "We will establish an economy specific to Muslims." These are the basic elements of the impasse that we cannot get out of today, that contradicts the realities of the world we live in, that sometimes puts us in a difficult situation, and that leaves many people with Islamic and religious sensitivity not knowing what to do.
Yes, sir, it was really very explanatory. We still argue about whether a horse has teeth or not, because these are ongoing discussions today, but we refrain from counting how many teeth it has, as the servant said when we find a horse. It is actually a very difficult situation for the Muslim world. It is an issue that is open to discussion. However, this can be easily understood in terms of Islamic economics. Thus, you have explained the method here. In other words, you have mentioned two types of methods. Yes, either we will examine it directly here or we will try to make inferences from past texts. There was a nice distinction here. However, if we open up the examination part a little more, how should we see it?
Of course, Fatma Hanim here. There is a phenomenon called economics, people's economic behavior. In order to understand this, we must first understand what it is. Because now, for example, there is actually a very clear ruling on whether killing someone or stealing someone's property is bad, sinful, forbidden, and should not be done. However, if we cannot correctly define what murder is or what theft is, it becomes difficult for us to make this ruling. When we say that killing someone is forbidden, sinful, we all have something in our minds about killing people. In other words, we know what it is. It does not need to be explained or defined. But even there, for example, killing someone out of necessity to defend oneself or to defend one's homeland, to defend one's own values, in a defensive war to prevent attackers on the other side, is not the same as committing murder out of tolerance. Therefore, as I have tried to explain here, the phenomenon itself forms the basis for the religious ruling to be given regarding it. Before we can make a judgment about what is right, what is wrong, what is halal, what is haram regarding the economic behavior of people and religious provisions, we need to understand the object of the event. It is an indisputable thing that riba is haram. I am not a scholar of jurisprudence, so I do not want to get into a discussion about this anyway. We specifically avoided this in the book. We said, let's not know for sure that it is haram in the Quran. There is an action called riba. So, what action does this correspond to in our economic life today? So, when we say how is killing a person haram, we know what that killing is. We know that it will not be haram in some cases. Yes, what you are doing is actually killing a person. But if you are doing it out of necessity to protect yourself, you cannot call it haram. Or there has been an attack on your country, your homeland. You are defending your country. You are defending your sacred values. If you are killing someone on the other side to eliminate the attacker during that defensive war, it is haram. In fact, the ruling on this goes to something completely different. Therefore, we need to understand that economy in terms of reality. Muslims had a disadvantage in this respect, Fatma Hanim. During the period when the economic reality we live in today emerged, during the period when the fundamental discussions regarding it were held, we had other, much more urgent, much more burning problems. As Muslims, we were in a struggle for existence. The regions and lands we lived in, the values we defended and believed in were under attack. We were busy with them.
We missed this part when our priorities changed.
Therefore, we could never be a part of that discussion. We tried to understand and grasp it from behind. Of course, some psychology came into play there. We had a little difficulty in understanding what economic behavior was. So what we actually need to do today is to understand and grasp reality as it is, and then try to solve what it corresponds to. Do you know what happens otherwise? Look, there is something like this at the root of these discussions about Islamic banking that cannot be resolved. Let me give you an example. If you allow me, you will understand it better. It was the mid-1990s. I was still at the beginning of my academic career and doing my doctorate. At that time, it was called private finance institutions. Now it is called participation banking. Until then, these private finance institutions had not issued credit cards because this issue could not be solved. How will it be? Is the equivalent of fiqh like that?
Is it permissible or not?
Then one of these private financial institutions issued a credit card. Actually, maybe I should mention this. Since the day I started my career, this Islamic economy, the finance issue of Islam, has always been an important research topic for me. If I remember correctly, there is an Islamic Development Bank within the conference organization. They organized an academic program together with Marmara University. I participated in this study for the first time there as a panelist at the very beginning of my career. Since that day, I have been to every place in the world where this subject of Islam, Islamic economics and finance is discussed, debated, studied and researched. I have participated in programs there. As you know, I also had a career in bureaucracy and in practice. In other words, since this is a subject that interests me both theoretically and practically, I have always been involved in it. Therefore, I have gained experience and knowledge in that subject. I am also interested in it. I am trying to understand how this credit card will work. The manager responsible for that project, a friend of mine who I also like, said, look, now he said, when we give this credit card, we make 2 agreements with the customer at the same time. Now, you go and shop at a market. You buy the things you put in your basket. You bring the products. You will pay at the cash register. You insert the credit card into the POS device. Of course, there is no such thing as contactless payment.
Before the pandemic.
Exactly, of course. I'm talking about the mid-90s. He said that this first contract comes into play there. What happens? The private financial institution appoints you as its proxy. You buy those goods as the proxy of the private financial institution. In their name. It's done. After that, the second contract comes into play. As the proxy of the private financial institution, you sell these goods to yourself on credit. Why are we doing this? So that the work we do conforms to the patterns defined in historical texts. Look, the work we do is exactly the same in terms of quality. Anyway, about these participation banks, of course, what they do is good and they will answer that too. I'm not saying this to make a point. There is not much benefit in going into these arguments here. Something has also emerged there. A corpus has been formed to its own extent. I have already written my thoughts on them, my views on their validity, the extent to which they are valid in the book Money and Interest in Muslim Societies from Past to Present, which is the basis for today's conversation. But now look, what we are trying to do is, on the one hand, there is a job that we cannot avoid in the reality of life. We want to do this. But while we are doing this, what about the nature of the work we are doing? Does it really contradict the basic values and principles of Islam and the practices of the Prophet? Is it really something contrary to this? Instead of discussing the reality of these without discussing them, instead of examining whether they contradict the fundamental values of Islam, whether they comply with the values that Islam foresees and recommends to its own followers, Muslims, it directly looks at the patterns. As long as it complies with these patterns, there is no problem. It is something that is applied in many places in Anatolia. It is a method. It will be a bit like this, but it will be like a joke. But now we are doing the following transaction with you, Fatma Hanim. Let's say I come and say that I have this book on money and interest in Muslim societies from the past to the present. I say, Fatma Hanim, I have such a beautiful book. I want to sell it to you. Would you buy it? You say, oh sir, what a beautiful book. Okay, I sold this book to you for 100 liras, I say. Then I turn around, take a tour and come back and say, Fatma Hanim, there is such a book. I have heard many texts about money and interest in Muslim societies from the past to the present. I want to buy it. Do you have it? Oh yes sir, you say. I will buy it, but I don't have any money on me. If I pay for this book in a year, I will pay for it. Okay, sir, you say the price is 150 liras. I'll buy from you. Now, what have we actually done, Fatma Hanim? I have borrowed 100 liras from you at 50% interest per annum. So now, but we are both very comfortable because we have made it fit the formal terms. But maybe we should look at the transaction itself. I mean, is this loan transaction really what Islam is trying to prohibit? So, by doing it in this way, we are actually doing something bad. Because we are comforting ourselves, yes, it's a cover-up going around the back of it. This is where the discussion about Islamic economics should be taken out of form, shape, pattern, or conformity to historical facts. And we should perceive and learn the phenomenon of economics in its own reality, just like Ibn Hazm did with light, just like Ibn Sina did with anatomy, just like Khwarizmi did with mathematics. This reality is a phenomenon, economic behavior. Let us see economic behavior as a verse and understand it. Then, after making this definition, let our jurists make the fiqh rulings about it, but let them make them knowingly. Because otherwise, do you know what happens? If you pay attention, the title of the book is money. The first thing is money. There is a great confusion in the minds of Muslims about the concept of money. Because when we look at the books of jurisprudence written in the past, the scholars of jurisprudence who wrote those books naturally put forward some rulings based on the money of their time. Money is this, therefore, such and such transactions can be made with money. Such transactions cannot be made. However, the money we use today has nothing to do with that money. In other words, let's not say it has nothing to do with it, but it still functions as a medium of exchange, as a store of value, as a unit of account. But its quality is not the same. In other words, there is no metallic money system based on gold and silver in the world today. Believe it or not, it was one of the things I mentioned in the book. Some of those who examined this issue more healthily and sensibly saw that it really is impossible for us to adapt today's money system to that is, the structures in the books of jurisprudence. They came up with the following suggestion. Actually, the basis of the problem is this paper money system. It is the banking system. Let's abolish them completely and return to the gold money system. So, instead of grasping reality and developing a solution that is compatible with reality, you are trying to fit reality to the ready-made solution you have. I think this will be the most explanatory answer to the question of which methodology we should use to approach this.
It was a really clear answer, sir. While it is possible to make the issue easier, we are trying to choose the difficult one in this case, as you have shown. Because when we understand these theories, when we understand what money is, what economics is, we will be able to solve this within the framework of our own understanding of Islamic economics without having to go back to the past and make excuses, so to speak.
There is no such thing as Islamic grilling or Islamic roasting, is there? There is no concept. There is no such concept as Islamic spinach. What is there? But what is there? Of course, there are halals and harams. But wait a minute. We are Muslims. We are not under any compulsion that the spinach we cook must also be authentic. I mean, if there is nothing haram in it, in other words, we can cook spinach the way the Greeks cook spinach, or the way the Germans grill beef, we can do the same. As a matter of fact, the emergence of these concepts of Islamic economics and Islamic finance has taken place under very specific historical conditions. So we should not limit ourselves to those historical conditions. Look, for example, if I give an example about this money issue, maybe what I mean can be understood a little better. It seemed very striking to me. There are changes in Muslim societies over time. For example, in addition to gold and silver, there are less valuable metals such as copper, iron, and kurus, but they are never evaluated in the same category as gold and silver, which are considered money in themselves. Now, one of the discussions here is one of the issues discussed in the Hanafi school of thought. You lend someone a loan, but that money has been withdrawn from circulation. What will you do? Now, if the money is gold or silver, there is no problem. Why? Because the nominal value of gold and silver is taken into account, not the value of gold and silver. That is, you pay your debt by giving the same amount of gold and silver. There is no problem. But what if this money is not gold and silver, but copper? There are differences of opinion. I mean, I won't go into the details, but there is an opinion like this. that debt is now eliminated.
Debt cancellation.
Because there is no way to find that money again and pay your debt in that currency. But again, within the Hanafi school of thought, the school of thought belongs to the Imams. There is also such an opinion. They say, wait a minute, isn't it clear what could have been bought with that money on the date the debt was given? Isn't the purchasing power of that money clear? Therefore, this debt can be paid with another currency that allows the same things to be bought. Now, for example, this is one of the things that the fiqh scholars who have issued a fatwa stating that an increase as much as inflation in the near future would not fall within the scope of interest prohibited by the Quran and Islam base their opinions on. In other words, if what is meant by money is purchasing power, then a year ago you lent me 100 liras, you gave me a piece of paper with 100 written on it. I come and say today, Fatma Hanim, thank you very much. I am paying you back my debt. Here I gave you back a piece of paper with 100 written on it. You would rightfully say to me, wait a minute, Ibrahim Hoka, what are you doing? This is not what I gave you. No, look, it's the same. Even I took a photo of it. Look, it's the same paper, the same color has the same patterns on it and the same number is written. But with this, I can't buy the things I bought a year ago. Now look, we can't even get out of this argument. This actually shows how pathetic we are.
Unfortunately, it is actually a very clear picture. In other words, we can compare this openly and clearly. But when we adapt it to today, when we see it today, we can look at it from a fiqh perspective and say that interest is haram and take the situation to another side. We hope that with this program, we will open a door to a situation where we can open a door to a little more explanation. Sir, thank you very much for your valuable comments.
I thank you. I wish you good publications.
Dear viewers, this week we talked about Islamic economics, Islamic finance, money, and interest issues. See you in the next episode. Goodbye.